There are few games that I've been more excited for than Atlus's upcoming title, Metaphor ReFantazio. With this game being headed by Atlus's Studio Zero, it's pretty much a foregone conclusion that it will be a masterpiece. And so, with there being a lot of information about the game circulating and available to us now, I've compiled a list of 10 of the most interesting details about the game that would be pretty easy to miss, from what the real-world language is that's shown on screen several times throughout the trailers, to the psychological and philosophical ideas that have been confirmed by Atlus to have been used as inspiration as they built their combat and social systems in this game. But before we dive into the 10 facts about Metaphor ReFantazio that you didn't know, make sure, if you like this kind of content, to share it wherever you like sharing things, whether it's Twitter, Reddit, anywhere, because it helps us so incredibly much. But without further ado, let's just jump into the list. Now, I think it's pretty fair to say that in a lot of works of fantasy, if we see a language that we're unfamiliar with, it's easy to assume that this is simply a language that was made up by the developers for the purposes of the game to indicate a foreign and unknown text that is readable for the characters in the game, but unknowable to us, the players, until we're told what it means. Now, in most games, I wouldn't think too much past that. However, Metaphor doesn't seem like it's most games. In a video that's been posted on Atlus Japan's YouTube channel, it was revealed that much of the text in the game is written in the real-world language Esperanto. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar, just like I wasn't, Esperanto is an artificial language that was created in the late 1870s by L.L. Zamenhof. It's a language that was created with the intention of being a universal language that all countries could use as an international auxiliary language. While this never fully caught on, the language itself never actually died off, and many people are still able to use it and understand it to this day, even though it's not officially recognized by the UN or acts as the official language for any nation on the planet. It's been stated that this language will be used in the world of Metaphor, and the word Fantasio from the title, as well as some of the lyrics in the game's soundtrack, use this artificial language. Who knows? For folks who are actually familiar with Esperanto, unlike myself, this could give them even further context into the world of Metaphor and what some of the things that have flashed on the trailer actually mean. But what I think is particularly interesting, though, is how the use of this language in the world of Metaphor further ties these characters and the narrative to our real world, which, as the trailers have shown, is what they see as their utopia and where their fairy tales kind of take place. Though it looks like the influence of the real world on Uchronia doesn't end with fairy tales and an artificial language. I think it's an understatement to say that art has an incredible influence on the world of Metaphor, with just the world itself having that very intentionally painted look to it through and through. But this isn't just an interesting and unique aesthetic choice by the developers. The entirety of the world is rooted in a foundation of artistic inspiration, with there being no clear indicator of this than the Homos, or the Ningen enemies, which is human in Latin and Japanese respectively, that we have seen multiple times in stills and in the trailers up to this point, with some of these being directly inspired by the work of the Dutch painter Hieronymus Bosch. Two of the most tangible and inarguable parallels that we have seen up to this point both come from the portion of his painting, The Garden of Early Delights, though I think that these are not the only examples that we will get straight from Bosch himself, with one that I feel very certain will appear coming from this painting on screen now. It's interesting that these dreamscapes are used so heavily in this fantastical and magical world, though perhaps these are appearing because of the artificial limitation placed on magic in this world, and these humans are the dangers of stifling magic, as they themselves, while not being intelligent life forms in the way that many of the races within the United Kingdom of Uchronia are, still have a very powerful magic that's outside of the scope of anything that the citizens of this world can currently fully comprehend. And I think it's really interesting how the developers have used these more non-traditional depictions of a fantasy world as kind of the basis for their first outing in the genre. Speaking of magic though, something that I thought was really interesting is that to be able to use magic in the United Kingdom of Uchronia, you must use these magical items. And this can be seen in the trailers as the rods that people are using to shoot fire at our caravan, or the sword that the protagonist uses as like a hoverboard kind of thing. Now, something interesting about this is that we have been told that imagination is the source of magic in this world. So taking this into account, I don't think it's a stretch to say that these magical items are a way to ensure control over the country, and that the imagination of the people is intentionally stifled to maintain the hierarchy of power. We see in the trailers books that depict our real world as their utopia, but we also see several shots of text being redacted, pages being torn, and books being burned. The best way to control people is by limiting their access to knowledge that could help them to be able to think outside of the box for themselves. The fewer new and unique ideas that are circulating in the world, the less likely that people are to ask questions that the nation's elites may not want to address. It's all about maintaining control, which, once the king gets assassinated and the election for the next king is forced, they again show a need to control the situation and maintain their status as the ones in charge by framing this election as a competition. Anything to be able to keep the populace in line and themselves in the comfortable positions that they currently are in. But it would be pretty boring if nothing affected that status quo. Here we come to mess things up. Atlus's love of Carl Jung is something that just needs to be studied. Like, don't get me wrong, he is the mastermind behind a lot of the most fun concepts in psychology. Even if a lot of them don't fully hold up today, they are the precursors for the ideas that do hold up. And so while Persona focuses on personas, shadows, masks, and the collective unconscious, all of these being juicy Jungian concepts, Metaphor has archetypes. Now, to keep it as simple as possible, Jung believed that people are all predisposed towards specific archetypes, and these archetypes play a role in influencing people's behaviors and personalities. It was his belief that these archetypes housed innate human knowledge that was passed down to us from our ancestors. The reason this matters is because throughout the course of the game, by developing relationships with the people and the citizens that you encounter all over the land, the protagonist will begin to see certain qualities in these people that can in turn take form as an archetype. You can even see the same markings on this handshaking graphic that illustrates creating a bond with someone, as is present on the playable characters in the battles when they activate their archetypes, which I guess requires the person to rip out their heart, because apparently the summoning animation in Personas 3 and 5 just weren't quite brutal enough, right? Now, if you've taken any Psych 101 class, you're probably thinking, but wait, Persona and Shadows are archetypes, aren't they? And yes, that's definitely true. It looks like Atlus is more so leaning into the idea of archetypal images, which are universal patterns or motifs which come from the collective unconscious and are found across cultures. While the possibilities on what could be an archetypal image are borderline endless, the 12 most common that we see across cultures since this idea has been proposed are on screen now. While it's clear that in the game itself, these archetypes will be acting more like classes or jobs in Final Fantasy, with you being able to unlock archetypes for the Seeker, the Knight, the Thief, the Fighter, and loads more throughout the course of the game. They also adhere to the idea that these archetypes, or these universal patterns of behavior, will likely heavily reflect how the characters that you will obtain them from will act, and in turn, this will give you the power to be able to grow and develop as well as you learn more and more about them, which also gives way to a concept that's more philosophical in nature that we'll talk about later in this video. Now, what's a bustling fantasy world without a wide assortment of peoples and cultures to learn about? And in the world of Metaphor, there are 8 core tribes, not including monsters and the like, that make up the world, with 2 notable inclusions that we know of right now. The tribes are as follows, and I apologize if I mispronounce any of them. The Clemar tribe, the Rosant tribe, the Ishkia tribe, the Rogu tribe, the Nydia tribe, the Parapus tribe, the Yugif tribe, the Matsutari tribe, with each of these tribes having their own very specific indicators and defining features, which if you want a video on that, let me know in the comment section down below. However, our protagonist is in none of these tribes and is instead part of a minor tribe known as the Elda tribe, which is one that has been branded as tainted by the state religion, the Sanctus Church, as they believe that this tribe has inherited dangerous or heretical magic, or if I had to take a guess, magic that they fear because it is far beyond the scope of their control, and they see this Elda tribe as a threat. I wouldn't be surprised if they used to be a major tribe, and then when they became too powerful, they were stifled. But in addition to the Elda tribe being a minor tribe in the world, it also seems that fairies like Gallica are not recognized as a tribe of their own. It's been stated that this is a world of discord, distrust, and prejudice, and so it will be interesting to see how someone like the protagonist, who is part of such a marginalized tribe, can come to win the people's favor of this broken world, as well as what other minor or marginalized tribes may exist in this world and how we interact with all of these different kinds of peoples in a world where it seems like things are very much structurally set up to favor some tribes over others. Now, the aesthetics of the world are particularly interesting in any fantasy setting, and in my opinion, the most interesting aspect of this is how the characters actually dressed. When talking with Shigenori Sojima about how the characters of Metaphor dress, he said that they don't simply want to create, that medieval fantasy aesthetic, and instead want to take more modern elements and integrate them into the designs and the wardrobe of these characters, which can be very clearly seen in many of the fabrics and patterns found on the clothes of characters that summons up a not unfamiliar look, but one that is just disconnected enough from the modern day that's not jarring to see in this more fantasy setting. And so they decided to go for a more 1960s-esque aesthetic. And once again, this provides another key link between the real world and the United Kingdom of Uchronia. Whether this is just real world inspiration that was taken to enhance and make this world look more unique and differentiate it from other fantasy settings, or if there actually is a tie to the real world based on this fashion, I'm not sure, but it does its job well of giving Metaphor that very distinctive look and feel that hasn't been seen in this genre, at least in my awareness up to this point. Now, if there's something that this team knows how to do better than anything, it's how to create interesting and dynamic social systems that are just as integral to focus on throughout your time in the games as your combat stats are. Just like in Persona 5, there are 5 stats that you can level up throughout your time in Metaphor. However, this time, these stats won't just be the barriers for you to succeed in high school, and in turn, your ability to make a bunch of friends. They will likely be the linchpin for the success of your campaign to be king. And I suppose still your ability to make a bunch of friends. This time around, we have courage, wisdom, tolerance, eloquence, and imagination, which I think, based on what we've talked about with the magic system, imagination is going to be a big one to focus on. I think it's pretty clear how developing all of these traits will be beneficial in your campaign, and the game makes it very clear, even in its UI, that this above all else will help you to get the crown, with each of these skills being represented as a spike on the crown, or at least that's how I'm interpreting it, even if it does also kind of look like a sun. But it's on the head, looks like a crown, so we're going with that it's a crown. This one is actually a pretty well-known fact, but I had to include it because I think that the talent that has been shoulder tapped for this game is immediately apparent, with Nier Automata's Kota Kazuma coming on as a concept artist, being in charge of the art of the world and the backgrounds featured in the game. It's also interesting that Kazuma is working on this game because, as was brought up by one of the game's voice actors in one of Atlus's live streams, Yoko Taro has actually said that he was afraid that this game would crush the Nier series. And while I think we can all agree that Nier and its legacy isn't going anywhere, it's definitely a tremendous compliment from such a prolific creative like Yoko Taro. Add on to this that Neon Genesis Evangelion's Ikuto Yamashita came on as the mechanical designer, with the Gauntlet Runner being the notable machine that we have seen in pretty much everything that has been shown in the game thus far, being his brainchild. It shows us just how much care and attention and quality has gone into every aspect of this world, with the Gauntlet Runner being what the protagonist uses as their primary mode of travel throughout the world. The fact that they brought so many visionaries onto this project, in addition to the visionaries within Atlus itself, is a sign of the sheer quality of this title and the faith that they have that it will become the third pillar of Atlus, along with Shin Megami Tensei and Persona. Okay, so this is my favorite one. This is the one I'm most excited about, because you'll notice that in the combat menu, there's a synthesis option. Well, at first, I simply wrote this off as, a new gameplay mechanic. Atlus doesn't play that way, though. This mechanic has been confirmed in the announcement celebration live stream, hosted on Atlus's YouTube channel, that this system is actually inspired by Hegelian dialectic. Now, Hegelian dialectic, if you aren't familiar, is a system that is now often used in literature that focuses on thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. Hegel wasn't a man who was interested in finding infallible or indisputable truths, but instead wanted to use this system he had created to replace old ideas with new and more sophisticated ideas. Essentially, for Hegel, a thesis represents the status quo. The antithesis is what challenges this status quo and helps to pinpoint any shortcomings or problems with the initial thesis. And the synthesis is the revised thesis that has taken into account any of the gaps in logic from the original thesis that have been uncovered by the antithesis, leaving you theoretically with a stronger and more well thought out idea. The use of this as a gameplay mechanic is actually really cool, because I wonder if this synthesis system is in part how you will upgrade and strengthen different archetypes. While you start with the base archetype of a knight that you obtained by developing a bond with another character, likely Hulkenberg if I had to take a guess, then over time you can iterate on this idea of what a knight is with side events throughout the game, challenging your views on what a knight actually should look like, with the story being so heavily focused on concepts of fear, imagination, social status, and innate biases among people. This idea of changing one's own viewpoint to strengthen yourself in combat is one I really like the sounds of, as it appears to be not only a fun and dynamic gameplay system, but one that will tie in so heavily to the main narrative of not blindly accepting the status quo and what is spoon-fed to you by the church or the elites of Uchronia. And so I wouldn't be surprised if developing bonds with the people in this game, while also leveling up these archetypes, are what create these stronger synthesis moves. Perhaps your rank 1 bond with Hulkenberg creates a very, very basic and general idea of what a knight should be, but by the time you reach rank 8, that's when you get the full picture and you have fully refined your idea of what a knight can be, and that's when the archetype of a knight gets to be as strong as it can get. And finally, for number 10, the soundtrack of Metaphor is described by Shoji Meguro as being based on the sounds of religion, with many of the tracks being inspired by hymns or Buddhist prayers, with some Esperanto thrown in there for fun, to create and reflect the grand scale of the world these characters are living in, and that we as the player are exploring. Not to beat a dead horse, but this music choice being heavily inspired by religion is doubtless to summon a vision of what is to come in the game for us as the players, as religion is focused so heavily on faith in a higher power. While religion in and of itself can be incredibly good and beneficial for society in a lot of ways, the dangers within religion cannot be understated, as in many ways it provides people with a comfort in the status quo, and in turn a resistance and even times a fear of change, whether it's in their own ideas or in society as a whole. This ties back in with the idea of Hegelian dialectic being the source of power for the protagonist in the story, as he is able able to adapt his viewpoint to strengthen him in this world where change is not necessarily what the people in power are too keen on, and this likely trickles down to the people that they are presiding over. I think it's safe to say that each track will undoubtedly be meant to summon a very specific feeling in us as the players, and whether I'm right or wrong about why a more religious theming for the music was chosen, I am beyond excited to see how it takes form this fall. And those were 10 facts about Metaphor ReFantazio that you likely didn't know. And if you did know all of them, and maybe you know some facts that I don't know, let me know those in the comment section down below. And if you want to see more videos all about Metaphor, please let me know, share this video, and make sure to subscribe to this channel because it helps so incredibly much to let me know that I should keep making these kinds of videos. And if you want to see anything a little bit early, make sure to check out our Patreon with the link to that being in the description down below. As always, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, a fantastic rest of your week, and why not even a fantastic rest of your month, and I will see you in the next video. Later.